Okay, hello and welcome to this program of the Baeck Institute. My name is David Brown and I'm Director of Public History at Baeck Institute, and very happy to welcome those of you here at the center with us in New York, and also those of you online to this very special program to celebrate the translation of a truly seminal book in the field of German Jewish studies. By an author, Monika Richarz, whose work I've been hearing about for 10 years since I started at Baeck Institute, and so I just had the pleasure of meeting in the last couple of weeks because of this event. So we're very proud that Monika will be joining us via video from Germany, and we have here in the room with us a number of esteemed speakers who have been deeply involved with this work and this book. And I would like to just introduce three of our contributors, and then I'll welcome Marion Kaplan to the podium, who will say a few words about Monika. First, a little order of business. We are here to celebrate the publication of an English translation of German Jews in the University. And we are very fortunate to be able to offer everyone participating in this program a discount code. So we don't have books with us here in New York, although there is one copy in Baeck. But if you go online to boydellandbrewer.com, and use the promo code BB140, you can get 40% off the book. So we'll
also flyers in the back.
And there are flyers in the back with the same information for those of you who are here in the audience with us, and we'll follow up with you on email, those of you online, so you can also take advantage of that. But in addition to Monika, we're very privileged to have the book's translator, who translated this book on his own initiative. Joydeep Bagchee is a core doctoral fellow, doctoral faculty member at the Hindu University of America, and a visiting lecturer who, at least until recently, was based in Berlin. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the New School for Social Research, and his areas of expertise are the 20th century continental philosophy, German Romanticism, Nietzsche, philology, and the Western reception of Indian thought. So we'll hear a few words from Joydeep, and then Shmuel Feiner will give a presentation about some broader issues. I believe he wrote the introduction to this new translation. And he is a professor of modern Jewish history at Bar-Ilan University and chairman of the Historical Society of Israel, as well as the Samuel Brown Chair for the History of the Jews in Germany. And he's published many books about Jewish philosophy and the Haskalah. And he is also a recipient of the Alexander von Humboldt Research Award and the former chairman of the Baeck Institute, Jerusalem. Then we'll hear from a physician and a scholar who has been using Monika's work on German Jews in the university for some time, and he'll give a presentation on how this work has informed his research. Rabbi Edward Reichman received his BA from Yeshiva University and his MD from the Einstein College of Medicine, and rabbinic ordination from the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. So he's a full-time doctor of emergency medicine at the Montefiore Medical Center, but he also lectures internationally on Jewish medical ethics, and he's edited books and penned many book chapters and journal articles on Jewish medical history. So right now, I'd like to invite Marion Kaplan to the stage to introduce Monika, and I guess Marion's credentials are well known. So
nice to be here. Hello, Monika.
Hello, Marion.
To Berlin. I'm delighted to introduce my colleague and longtime friend, Monika Richarz, who has led the way in German Jewish history for many decades and in at least 3 countries besides Germany. She's contributed to the Leo Baeck Institute research projects and volumes in New York, London, and Jerusalem, as well as in Cologne and Hamburg, and of course now in Berlin. Her overarching interest has always been to discuss and to expose German Jewish life before the Holocaust. And her scholarship has succeeded in showing its variety and richness. As a research fellow at the LBI New York from 1972 to 1979, which is where we met across the table, the research, library table, she published the now classic 3-volume series, Jewish Life in Germany, Memoirs from 3 Centuries, pioneering in social history of German Jews, shifting the traditional emphasis from political and intellectual religious history, mostly the history of men, to the everyday lives of families, and providing an inclusive memoirs collection of Jews in cities and in the countryside, of bourgeois and poorer Jews, and of quotidian women, men, and children. This was, at its time, an absolutely path-breaking work and forged a new direction in German Jewish history. These volumes were later published in a 1-volume edition in English and Hebrew and were standards in many courses in German history. In Germany, they became very popular, introducing university students, but also school children, to Jewish history. From 1984 until 1993, she directed the Germania Judaica Library in Cologne and taught Jewish history at the University of Cologne. And she was chosen to direct the Institute for the History of German Jews in Hamburg, where she was from 1993 to 2001, and also taught at the university there. In Hamburg, she organized 2 major conferences, one on Glickel of Hameln that she edited as a book, Die Hamburger Kauffrau Glickel, and the other on rural Jews, including cattle dealers, which she later co-edited with Reinhard Rurup and published in German. There were many others, but these are like the 2 major ones. Another major project, while administering academic institutions and teaching, included Jewish life in Germany, Memoirs from 3 Centuries, a project of the LBI New York, edited by Michael A. Meyer. She contributed an important section on Jewish women, urbanization, societal progress, and the history of education. That project, too, appeared in German, English, and Hebrew. Retirement did not mean the end of Monika's scholarship. She continued to write about Jewish maidservants and the Jewish lower classes. And in 2022, this year, she interviewed and helped to edit Wilma Igger's memoir about Jewish rural life in Bohemia, entitled Böhmische Juden, eine Kindheit auf dem Lande, which was published on Dr. Igger's 100th birthday. I will leave her first and very latest project that we celebrate today to our next speakers, a dissertation book that has her research from dozens of German and other university and other archives in Germany and has never become outdated. Thank you, Monika, for your intense engagement, commitment, and for pushing the scholarly boundaries in German Jewish history to all of our benefit. Okay, next person.
That's Monika.
Oh, that's Monika. Du bist dran.
I don't know if she knows that it's on.
Monika, I think you were going to share with us some thoughts about the context in which you wrote this book.
Yes.
So we'd love to hear from you now.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
Hello from Berlin to my audience in New York. First of all, Marion, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I feel very privileged to be able to speak to you today via Zoom about my book, German Jews and the University, that was recently published by Camden House in Rochester after being translated into English by Joydeep Bagchee. Actually, the translation was not even my idea, it was his. This plan had at first surprised me. But now that I see the book in front of me and have noticed colleagues in the US and Israel are reacting most positively to the existence of an English edition, I feel very glad about it and very thankful to Joydeep for this initiative. My book, written quite some time ago, is still constantly being used in Germany. As a matter of fact, during the last decades, the access of Jews to university education from its beginning to modern times has attracted increasing attention, especially in such topics as Haskalah, Jewish acculturation, and social upward mobility. So I hope the English version of my book will help scholars and especially students who don't know German to understand more easily social and cultural developments among German Jews in early modern times. This book was the very first I wrote. It grew out of my dissertation at the Free University of Berlin in 1970 and was published in German by the Leo Baeck Institute London in 1974. For a young German scholar, this was, of course, a great privilege at the time. Let me add that this way, my book also established my close relationship with the LBI that has lasted now for 50 years. Next, I would like to talk a little about the conditions under which my book was written. Facing the highly developed field of Jewish studies in Germany today, you may have problems to imagine the situation in 1965 when I started research. There was no interest in Jewish studies, no knowledge, no research, and no teaching in Germany. Just nothing. That included the universities because all of them had fired their Jewish professors after 1933, who were later killed if they didn't succeed in emigrating. There was just one exception. The Free University of Berlin, founded in 1948 in the American sector in opposition to the Humboldt University that was at that point under Soviet rule. When I studied at the Free University, I noticed that from time to time, the administration invited Jewish refugees, refugee scholars, as visiting professors, among them the social historian Hans Rosenberg, originally from Cologne, now in Berkeley. He was asked by the Free University to suggest a colleague who would teach Jewish history at the history department. This unique initiative did not originate in the university administration, as I found out later in the archives. It was a certain group of students that had asked for it. Students with one Jewish and one Christian parent, called in racist terms half-Jews, who had not been allowed to study at any university during the Nazi period. Several of them had even been among the student founders of the Free University. This is how, since 1952, Professor Adolf Leschnitzer, called Dolphy by his wife, came to West Berlin every summer for 3 months to teach Jewish history. He never moved to Berlin, but sojourned there as visiting professor during the summer break of City College in New York, where he taught German studies. Leschnitzer was a refugee from Berlin, where he had left in 1939 after running the school department of the Reichsvertretung der deutschen Juden. He had done that for 6 years. I joined his Berlin seminar in 1958 after a study trip to Poland, where the traces of the Holocaust were still most visible, that had been all swept under the carpet in Germany. I studied with Leschnitzer for many years, every summer, and he later became my doctoral advisor. Leschnitzer was also on the board of the LBI and suggested to them to publish my book once it was finished. The seminar Leschnitzer taught, these seminars were really small, usually having only about a dozen participants. But this was an interesting and very mixed group. There were Jewish students from immigrant parents, German students, and those I mentioned from a mixed Jewish and Christian background that had survived in Germany. One of Leschnitzer's students, Amos Funkenstein from Jerusalem, son of a rabbi, struck me immediately as much more knowledgeable in Jewish thought and tradition and traditional Judaism than Leschnitzer. Amos became a close friend. I guess my dissertation benefited more from his patient assistance than from Leschnitzer's doctoral advice during those short summers. There was no email yet. Only today I realize how extremely lucky I was to step into this niche of Jewish life and learning in Berlin, something that in those days was unique in all of Germany. Without Leschnitzer and Amos Funkenstein, I would never have written the book we have now in front of us. Both men liked each other a lot and had a great deal of humor. One day I complained to Amos that when people asked me about the topic of my dissertation, and I would tell them, they used to ask immediately, "Are you Jewish?" Obviously, only Jews were supposed to be interested in Jewish history. Amos laughed. He himself studied Christian medieval historiography, and he gave me the perfect advice. Next time somebody asks you again this question, just tell them you don't have to be a triangle to study math. Remembering our long-lasting friendship, I dedicated the English version of my book to the memory of Amos. He later became a well-known professor of medieval thought at UCLA and in Berkeley. In the last part of my talk, I want to share with you some of my impressions when rereading my work. I had strong reactions regarding two different aspects. First, how extremely anti-Jewish university politics continuously remained. And second, how in spite of this, German Jewish men succeeded already in the mid-19th century to be twice as often university educated as the general male population. Women, by the way, were only admitted to German universities in 1908. My study is to some extent a history of the German universities' discrimination of Jews. This is especially obvious in the beginning, when Jews were first admitted to individual Protestant universities from the late 17th to about the middle of the 18th century. Because of their mostly Jewish knowledge, they were regarded as culturally inferior and not acceptable for the university. Professors argued Jewish students would damage the reputation of the university as a Christian institution, while the students humiliated Jewish students, attacking them verbally and physically. The most common situation was to put pressure on them to convert to Christianity, a practice that continued with regard to university graduates right into the 20th century. With emancipation, the situation of the Jewish students improved, and finally, Catholic universities accepted them as well. The Prussian Emancipation Law of 1812 even conceded professorships to Jews. But when the first qualified candidates applied, this paragraph was cancelled. One of the applicants, Eduard Ganz, wrote sarcastically, "I belong to that unfortunate class of humans which is despised for being uncultured and persecuted because it educates itself," unquote. Ganz and dozens of other scholars were forced to convert in order to reach the position of a professor. In 1848, this situation legally changed, but on a social level, it mostly lasted up to the Weimar Republic regarding professorships. On the other hand, it is obvious that the permanently increasing number of Jewish university graduates created the basis for the high cultural standard of the developing Jewish middle class. Even while still excluded from becoming civil servants, judges, or teachers at the gymnasium, Jewish citizens were now numerous and successful as doctors, lawyers, journalists, or writers. They didn't only contribute to German culture, as we have read many times, they often created it. Last but not least, I very much want to thank Joydeep Bagchee. Without his initiative, we all wouldn't be here today to celebrate a book he so beautifully translated at his own expense, just because he thought it to be important. And this was not an easy translation at all. Joydeep also found the publisher for this work. I thank Jim Walker of Camden House as well for the careful production of this really attractive looking volume. May it have many readers. Thank you.
No, don't choose.
To begin? Yes, okay. So thank you everyone for coming here. When I was a student at the New School, I was a graduate student, and it's just a few blocks away for those of you who know New York. I used to sometimes walk up to Penn Station and cut through Chelsea, and I used to walk past 16th Street and see this institution and read the placards outside and know that there was a Rabbi Baeck and there was a connection with Berlin. And I never dreamed, I never had the courage to go up the steps. And I never dreamed that I'd one day be inside the institution presenting or sharing insights from a book that I translated. So I'm very honored to be here. I had prepared some remarks and written them out, but I also wanted to speak extempore today because I wanted to give you a more honest reckoning. When we academics, the minute we hear we have to present, we pull on our flak jackets and we have some kind of PTSD. So I started reading Arendt all over again last night and learned new things that I did not know about. For example, 1930, she reviewed Hans Weil's book, Die Entstehung des deutschen Bildungsprinzips. So new fact I discovered. And then I said, you know, I'm going to drive myself crazy. This is supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be intimate. So let me just talk about what moved me to do this book. The other reason I wanted to do it extempore is because this was my project. It was a very personal book for me. It was not a funding project. It was not a grant. It was not some kind of fellowship that I had to produce this. Alongside all my other work, translating, studying, teaching, I just put in the time over 4 years and I wanted to do this book. So I wanted to share that personal note with you. I'm really honored that all of you came out for a translation because the life of a translator is hard, arduous, and lonely. And you don't get the credit that the author does because obviously people reading it in translation don't know the difficulty of the original text and what it took to translate or to move it into a new language and still keep all the nuances. It's only translators who mutually appreciate each other's work. There's someone called Damien Searle who did Nietzsche's Anti-Education, and he's someone I want to meet simply because I appreciate his work as a translator. So I'm just grateful for that acknowledgement that this book has received and that so many people are following online and have turned out on a cold, rainy New York day. It means a lot to me because it shows that I was right when 4 years back I said this book is important. I'm going to dedicate some time to doing it. I think I was right to make that choice. I could tell you some story about how I went to the New School. It was Hannah Arendt's home. Rainer Schurman talked there. Vishwa was a personal friend. Vishwa was my teacher and mentor from New School days. He was actually Rainer Schurman's personal friend and one of the last people who saw him alive. And I actually also know the person who was the last person to see him alive, and how I then followed in their footsteps and went to Germany and saw concentration camps and started studying this aspect of German history. But the truth is I did not plan it. If there was a plan behind it, it was not mine. And yet all the steps seemed to somehow fit in. So I guess I was guided in some way. I was just an Indian student. I picked up German. There was no AP, there was no special education in India for German. I picked up German at 26. And then I went to Germany to read Heidegger and spent 17 years there at a total of 6 universities and at practically every stage. So I was an exchange student, a DAAD research fellow. I was a wissenschaftliche Hilfskraft. I was a Habilitant. So I've really seen every stage of the German university system. When I discovered Monika's book, it somehow moved me because it was the story of German academia, not told from the insider perspective, which so often tends to be a triumphalist perspective. We know all the standard works such as Paulson and going all the way back to Humboldt. all these eulogies of the German university. And in fact, at the back of the book, Appendix 9, there's actually a eulogy of the German university by Abraham Geiger, who says, the universities are the spiritual center of Germany, and the entire fame of Germany rests on this intellectual climate we have created, which is purely theoretical, presuppositionless, open to all ideas. The irony is that Geiger tried all his life to get a chair for Wissenschaft des Judentums, so the academic study of Judaism. He tried to anchor it in the university, and they kept rejecting him, rebuffing him, saying the university is a Christian corporation. There is no place for a Jewish Lehrstuhl at this university. So there's that mismatch between the positive, triumphalist narrative we get about the university and then the story that Monika carefully excavates, which is the story of people who were in the system, but still outsiders, people who are admitted in. There's a wonderful quote where, I can't remember the person who says it, but all the gates to the university were thrown open to the Jews, or to the temple of knowledge were thrown open to the Jews, but all the gates leading out of it to a productive life were tightly sealed against them. And I think that kind of describes the central problem that has sort of articulated the relationship of the university, not only to German Jews, but also to many other minorities or new groups of people who are trying to make their way in the university. So, why did I translate the book? There's obviously this personal aspect that I had gone through the German university system. There's the aspect that living in Prenzlauer Berg, you see the Stolpersteine throughout Berlin, and you run into them on a daily basis. And my first German teacher in Berlin, Cornelia Diekmann, whom I thank in the book, she was actually the child of 2 Holocaust survivors. I think they emigrated, or part of the family was killed. And I remember when she told us that in our German lesson that her parents came back to Frankfurt after the war, we were just aghast, we were flabbergasted. And we said, why? Warum? And she said, ja, sie wollten ein besseres Deutschland aufbauen. They wanted to build up a better Germany. So all these little personal vignettes sort of tied into the story of this book. But one of the things that made me want to translate is because I have studied Heidegger. The conversation around Heidegger's Nazism and anti-Semitism was always in the air. But one of the things that this book taught me is that whenever we find discrimination or exclusion, given the long 2.5 millennium history of Jewish-Christian interaction, it is often very helpful to look at what is going on in terms of the Jewish relationship, because very often that is sort of articulating forms of discrimination. And you can learn a lot by seeing, for example, reading Monika's book, let me understand certain university structures. The Habilitation, for example. I was actually in a Habilitation at that time, and then I read Monika's book and I discovered that is not just an advanced degree. It should be titled Advanced Degree for Keeping Jews Out of the University. That should be its full title, because when Jews started being admitted to the doctorate, faculties didn't want them to be Privatdozenten, so they created this new degree called the Habilitation, which only they had control of, whereas the territorial sovereign could push them to grant the PhD, the doctorate to Jews. They created this new degree that kept the Jews out. So this book is, for me, not just about German Jewish history. It's a book about processes we're all concerned with: fairness and exclusion and access to education. And to bring I'm going to end now, to bring the story full circle, that has been the subject with Vishwa, my colleague and my teacher who's here. It's the subject of all the books we do. This is, of course, the most famous one, which people may have heard of, the Nay Science, which is also a study of the exclusion of Indians and of Hindu learning from a field called Indology, which is a little bit like Judaistic, It's a study of Jews, but without Jews. So this is the study of Hindus, but without Hindus. So all my work with Vishwa has sort of circled around these issues of how the university functions and creates and legitimates a certain canon of knowledge and preserves certain forms of knowledge, but also excludes or negates other forms of knowledge. And I'm very honored that Mark Citron of the HJC, the Hindu-Jewish Coalition, is here, and Urmila Bhatt as well, because our two communities have so much to learn from each other. I'm now I recently moved back this September. I moved back to the US, and I teach for a small, very nascent university called the Hindu University of America. And when they were starting this university, they looked around for examples of what should its ideals be, what is its community. And they actually looked at the Hebrew Union College, and they looked at a couple of yeshivas as the inspiration to say, how can we, within the format of a modern university, integrate traditional knowledge and sort of revive a sense of community. So that partnership, that learning experience is ongoing, and I'm very glad to be a part of it. And let me bring it full circle by saying that Arendt is pervasively on my mind, because at the AR, the American Academy of Religion, I had to give a paper, and again, I ran into Arendt. She keeps coming back and back. And the thought that is sort of been with me the last few weeks I want to share is there's a passage somewhere where she says, for a Jew, even buying milk or bread is a political act. And how can we not be political when even the simplest things in life have become political for us? And that sort of struck me and moved me, because until the onus to be political in a certain way, to define oneself in the university, which Arendt explores, Richarz shows, hung over the Jews' heads, was there. How could they participate completely free and untrammeled in the pursuit of knowledge? How could they contribute to that? There's a wonderful statement written by someone to Henrietta. My memory is not what it used to be, but he says exactly the same thing. And I think it's quoted in my translator's note, which I hope you will all read. So on that note, one last thing I want to say, when I wrote to London for the rights, I said, I've translated this and could we publish it? They turned around, and the most surprising thing they said was, why don't you ask the author? She's still alive and she's living in Berlin. So I emailed her, and then I actually went down to Bogota Strasse, which is Zehlendorf. I took the train and I sat with Monika. And when you saw her on the screen, the chair behind her and the lamp, that is the actual chair on which I sat with my computer while she read out from the translation and made her recommendations and corrections, and I would type them in. So that's the process of how they did it. Thank you all.
Yeah, just to click through. It's the next slide.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Shalom. It is a pleasure to be here this afternoon in New York to celebrate this wonderful book by Monika Richarz. And I would also say that was a pleasure to meet the translator. We met in Berlin 6 months ago. We celebrated the first copy that Monika just got, and we together thought that it deserves a proper book launch. And now we are here. I crossed the ocean coming from Jerusalem, especially for this event, because I really thought that this is a milestone in Jewish history scholarship and German Jewish history. And thank you, of course, Leo Baeck, New York, for having us this afternoon for this event. From the mid-19th century until the Holocaust, a Jewish academic elite stood out in Germany, making impressive achievements. The members of this elite were far more numerous than the proportion of Jews in the general population. And Monika Richarz' impressive and learned book, yes, that's a proof that we were together there in Berlin. And Monika Richarz' impressive and learned book that we celebrate this afternoon asks the intriguing question, how this group emerged and what was its historical impact and importance. This is mainly the story of the Jews who broke through the barrier and acquired scientific knowledge other than traditional religious material. Monika makes the encounter of the Jews with the German University into a test case for the great questions of modern Jewish history in general and for the history of German Jewry in particular. Any discussion of education ultimately reveals the most important ideals and the vision of a society. And in this case, the figure of the good Jew or the right kind of Jew. The meaning of the transition from a Talmudic Jew to an academic Jew was a huge leap from one world to another. It is no wonder that modern Jewish education has been a focus of vehement dispute from the beginning to the present. Just look at the recent event reported last month in the New York Times. New York State officials have determined that a private Hasidic Jewish boys' school in Brooklyn is violating the law by failing to provide a basic education. And this is to 2020, not 1700. And this is not the only example. I can bring one from my own state. Unfortunately, the elected Prime Minister of Israel had just promised that the ultra-Orthodox schools will benefit from the budget of the state like any other school, even if they refuse to teach anything but Talmud. So this is today. And now, please, let me take you back almost 300 years to Germany of the early 18th century. It wasn't a great time in Jewish history. The numbers were very small, about 1 million Jews in the entire world, only 50,000 in many small communities in the German lands. Nowhere in Europe, the Jews were considered citizens. Most Jews spent most of their time struggling to make a modest living, suffered from poverty and high infant mortality. And only few families of core Jews were very rich, and they formed a kind of Jewish oligarchy. The trauma of the false messianic movement of Shabtai Tzvi was still fresh in the collective memory. And if you wanted to escape the unwelcoming reality and learn a religious book, you would have probably learned one of the popular Kabbalistic Musar books, where you were advised how to be saved from the terrible punishments in hell. By the end of the 18th century, some new prospects could be seen. The French Revolution will set the model for the integration of the Jews in Europe. Hasidism will become dominant in Poland, and the demographic and economic situation will improve. However, at the beginning of the century, there were only a few indications of the future development. But on the margins, something new was already emerging. And this is the window to the life of early 18th century Jewry that I would like to open now. So with your permission, I would like to share with you an erotic fantasy. Sitting atop a tall tree in the center of a deserted island, blooming with splendid variety of trees and flowers, I looked out towards the stormy sea. In the distance, I saw a ship whose sailors were struggling against the immense waves. All of their efforts to row to shore were unavailing. Within minutes, the ship broke in two and sank into the depths, to the heartbreaking cries of drowning men. A few still tried to grab hold of pieces of the ship in the hope of being carried to shore. I ran quickly down to the shore, where I found bodies spread about. Among them was a beautiful girl, a virgin, very fair to look upon, whom no man had known sexually. Lying there, her face pressed to the ground. Observing that she was still breathing, I tried with all my strength to save her. I took off her dress, anointed her body with oils and perfumes, and emptied her of the water she had swallowed until she opened her eyes. Then I carried her over my shoulder to my home, where I made her a comfortable bed, gave her wine to drink, and fed her until she regained her strength and I could talk to her. We immediately fell in love. Who are you? I asked her. And why were you on the ship? Since you have saved my life, the girl said, I will reveal to you that in the past I was the daughter of the aristocracy of Jerusalem. And with the other fugitives who departed the land in fear of the enemy, I left to take up a dreadful exile. For many long years, slaves ruled me in place of the kings and ministers to whom I had been accustomed. They betrayed and abandoned me, but a handful continued to recognize my value until you, my savior, appeared, saved my life, and redeemed me. For that, I will be eternally grateful and never leave you. But who are you? I asked such a beautiful, attractive maiden whom fate had so cruelly treated. And the girl replied and said, from the day that I left my land, throughout the years of my captivity, I have been known in the nations as algebra. So this erotic fantasy in which the science of algebra appeared in the guise of a rescued maiden was composed by Asher Anshel Worms, a young Jewish student of medicine and philosophy at Frankfurt am Oder University, as an introduction to this Hebrew algebra textbook published in 1722. Worms, disturbed by the neglect of sciences in Jewish culture and strongly attracted by the charms of science, described himself as no less than a redeemer of algebra. He undertook a most ambitious project, the publication of a series of works on science in optics, mechanics, geometry, astronomy, and others to enrich the Hebrew library, but only a portion of which was ever actually published. Worms was almost totally forgotten, and it didn't make a great difference. But for the historian who is searching the emergence of a Jewish enlightenment, this amazing romance with algebra is a meaningful evidence to the shift in Jewish culture. A few young scholars like Worms were not satisfied with the normative knowledge available in Jewish texts. In their view, the traditional library, limited to religious texts, needs a major change. And now let me give you another opportunity to enter the mind of young Jewish students 320 years ago. In the winter of 1702, an excited Jewish student walked through the corridor of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Frankfurt am Oder. His name was Shmuel Shimon ben Yaakov. He is mentioned in Monika's book. He was a native of Lithuania, had come to the Prussian University in order to fulfill his dream of studying medicine. Not only did he have to cope with the enormous challenges that academic studies posed, he also had to endure the pain of loneliness and distressing sense of being the only Jewish students in the university that year. He might have been able to overcome his misery if he could only find one another Jewish student so they could give one another support and entertain themselves into spare time together. When he learned that another Jewish student, Isaac Wallich, was actually studying at Halle University, he sent him an emotional letter suggesting that Isaac moved to Frankfurt University and joins him there. We are fortunate to have their beautiful Hebrew letters attesting their passion for knowledge. And let me read a few sentences from the letters. The desire of the Almighty, he said in his letter, the students from Frankfurt or the students in Halle, the desire that the Almighty has imprinted upon me lusts and yearns to satisfy my thirst in the sciences, and most of all, to light a torch of reason to guide me in the science of medicine, the student from Frankfurt wrote. And his friend from Halle told about the skills and innovative scientific ideas of the well-known professor Friedrich Hoffmann. Professor Hoffmann had such a great affection for the Jewish students that he took him under his wing. And he tells me, he said, all the remedies and singular secrets that he has acquired and invented that he will not disclose to one among thousands. So Isaac Wallich proudly wrote the other student. Each of these two young men was the only Jewish students in his university, and each wanted a companion with whom to converse and study. Oh, my brother, he said, in his letter, how much we would inquire into every wisdom as the good Lord allows us in religious study, in all its categories, sorts and distinctions, as well as in matters of wisdom from the holy books of our ancestors or from the books of the Gentiles written in their languages. The two medical students never met, but the letters are important for the historians who want to understand how was the early Jewish Enlightenment emerged, a generation before Moses Mendelssohn. Through the two windows to the early 18th century, we can already look at this intimate process in which young men were irresistibly attracted to an intellectual seduced by knowledge beyond the boundaries of Jewish culture. But something even more important and dramatic happened here. In order to understand it, we should know that one of the most significant historical outcomes of the Enlightenment in the 18th century Europe and in the Western civilization in general was the emergence of the modern intellectuals, an intelligentsia, a body of writers, journalists, scholars, large and powerful enough to challenge the religious elite of the clergy in Europe. A similar process took place in Jewish society, and the medical students we have just been familiar with the passion for science were among its early representatives. It was the elite of traditional Jewish society, the rabbis, who represented the highest social and cultural ideal at its finest. It actually implemented the commandments of the study of Torah, which in principle demands that all man's time be devoted to that study, leaving no legitimate space for any other knowledge. Members of this traditional elite were Talmudic scholars whose claim to authority was based on their command of Talmud and halachic knowledge and their status as community rabbis or preachers. No less important, this elite also enjoyed nearly exclusive control over the world of Hebrew books. The members were the ones who wrote and printed books and issued approbations for the books of their peers. Spokesmen for the Jewish community came only from this elite. In their sermons, halachic rulings, and books of ethics, they prescribed behavioral norms and thought and supervised over the religious norm. So let's listen to some more voices which testify to the passion for seductive knowledge. The Wild Mob, this is the book and this is the citation. The wild mob inside me is a strong desire to learn medicine. The student Benjamin Wolf Ginsburg wrote in 1737 from Göttingen University to the author of this responsa, the famous Rabbi Jacob Emden, who was at the time in Altona. The latter did not conceal his envy of the young student, who was in company of scholars surrounded by books containing the latest word in science. At the end of his long halachic response, which forbade the students from taking anatomy classes on the Shabbat, Emden was unable to contain his own desire for knowledge, and his concluding words were filled with images of attraction and erotic frustration. Like you, he said, like you, I also desire to enter into a covenant with the sciences and to cleave unto them with love. I long to delve into the depths of scientific research, to uncover its secrets, to satisfy my thirst and to take my pleasure. But to my misfortune, the sciences have despised me and have not let me penetrate them normally, כדרך הארץ, לבוא אליהם כדרך כל הארץ. But the emergence of the Jewish Enlightenment had another important dimension and was also a collective experience of Jewish frustrations and even humiliation. The early Maskilim expressed the sense of intellectual inferiority. For example, in Tuvia Cohen's introduction to his book of Science and Medicine, Maaseh Tuvia, from 1707, he explains how his meeting with Christian scholars and students, again, at the same university, University of Frankfurt on the other, was the driving force behind his decision to defend the reputation of the Jews. He describes the frustrations he felt at not possessing the knowledge required to come to terms with the new cultural world. So he said that we may, may reply to the nations of the world who arrest us, speaking arrogantly of us with contempt, saying, "You have no mouth with which to answer us, nor dare you raise your heads in matters of faith, for you have lost all your wisdom. Avda chokhmatchem." We could not raise our heads, say the students at the time, and then a medical doctor, Tuvia Cohen. We could not raise our heads and reply to them at all, for we had no experience in such arguments. Although, thank the Lord, we are very acknowledgeable in biblical verses, in the Talmud and Midrashim, in such debates against them, we are impoverished and wanting. The force of this seductive science was unstoppable. It was integrated into the spirit of the new secular elite that developed from the end of the 18th century. The result was dramatic. The expansion of Jewish intelligentsia whose formal education and direct intellectual and social ties to the non-Jewish world of humanities and sciences enabled its members to live in both worlds. These scholars broke away from the traditional elite and became well known as physicians, scientists, or philosophers with their own specific traits and professional identities. A bright future awaited this elite in the 19th and 20th century, when it would form the backbone of the educational bourgeois and the Jewish intellectuals of Europe. So that was my contribution to this event. I wanted to show you the meaning, the dramatic meaning of this transformation into this new type of the academic Jew. So thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's a tremendous honor and thrill for me to join you all, to be among such esteemed scholars, many of which I've known for many years and have followed their work for many years. A tremendous debt of gratitude to Professor Richarz for her extraordinary work, and to Joydeep. I actually reached out to him immediately upon finding out about this translation to personally thank him, because I honestly thought that he translated this for me personally, because I suspect I don't know you all. I don't know what you're researching, but I don't know anyone who appreciated this translation more than I did. I've spent many, many years researching the relationship of Jews in medicine, in particular the training of Jewish physicians. And I was well familiar with Monika's work, have referenced it for many years, but to be perfectly honest, didn't have full access to it because of my my deficiency in the German language. So Joydeep, tremendous debt of gratitude, and to the publisher for publishing this and allowing people like myself to access it. What I'd like to do for you today is to give you a prequel, if you will, to the work of to Monika's extraordinary work, focusing a little bit on the University of Padua, which is the place of training, which we'll mention in just a moment, prior to Germany. And secondly, a transition from Padua to Germany, as reflected in some extraordinary archival material, and a supplement to the work of Professor Richarz, actually seeing with your eyes some of the things that she references, which I suspect even the greatest scholars haven't seen some of the work I'm going to present today from the libraries. I'm sure they read about it, but may not have actually seen it. I came a few weeks ago from northern Italy, where I spoke at the University of Padua and at the Jewish Museum of Padua. Monika's extraordinary work focuses on the German Jews and the training of the German Jews in Germany. In her work, she had to go to many universities and go through many archives because the Jews attended dozens and dozens of universities in Germany. Prior to that period of history, she starts from 1678. Prior to that period of history, especially, and I'm focusing, I apologize, exclusively on medical training. And in fact, most Jews who attended universities in this era only really trained in medicine. At that time, there really was no other primary offerings for them. But starting in the 1500s, 1600s, if you were a Jew and you wanted to attend a university and train in the field of medicine, there was really one major address, and that address was the University of Padua. Sporadically, Jews attended other universities in Italy and elsewhere, but the University of Padua, which parenthetically is celebrating its 800th anniversary this year, was officially opened its doors to non-Catholics. So Protestants attended and Jews attended, starting from the 1500s and onwards. So Jews who wished to attend attended really the University of Padua. I coordinated at the university in conjunction with the Jewish Museum of Padua a small exhibit reflecting that period of history. That exhibit actually started November 2nd. For those of you who are going to be in Italy, it's running until December 31st. These are some of the items in the showcase. If you can see, some diplomas from Jewish graduates of the university, which I'll mention momentarily. And here is an interesting reference from the 1400s of the Holy Roman Emperor bestowing an honor called Count's Palatine on a Yehuda Messer Leon, giving him the privilege to grant medical degrees to Jewish students at that time who couldn't obtain their degrees from the university. The archival records from that period of time obviously include the archival records of the university, and the University of Padua has extraordinary and relatively complete archives. But what I spent a number of years collecting, and I'll share with you just a very few examples over the last few years, are diplomas specifically of Jewish medical graduates of the University of Padua, and I've so far procured copies of 19 diplomas of the University of Padua, Jewish graduates specifically. And another very interesting archival item, poems, congratulatory poems. Now in the Renaissance, poetry was very common. Poetry was written for many events, for births, for deaths, for everything in between, for marriages. One interesting, very unique subgenre of which most people are not familiar are poems that were written in honor of Jewish graduates of the University of Padua. Not exactly best-selling work, but I've so far identified 105 examples of these poems for about 60 to 70 students from the University of Padua. So here, just for a few moments, I'll share with you, because our focus is on German students specifically, I've isolated from the research that I've done some examples from German students. So I will share with you a diploma of a German Jewish student who attended the University of Padua. Again, because there really were no options when they were attending. They didn't have all these German universities open. They only opened in the late 1600s, early 1700s. Just for comparison, this is a diploma of another graduate from the University of Padua, and this is the diploma from William Harvey. So William Harvey, you will notice his diploma. He graduated Padua in 1602. It says, "In Christe nomine," Amen, in the name of Christ. Now, if you're an Orthodox Jewish student attending university, and your mother is sending you to medical school and paying the bill, she's not going to be very happy if you come home with a diploma that says, "In Christe nomine." So what we see here is we see that there are actually accommodations made for the Jewish student. Oh, I'll just wait till this is pulled off.
Sorry.
But I will show you two examples. I apologize, the clicker is not working. Eddie, the clicker doesn't seem to be working for me. I apologize.
Sorry.
There you go. Okay, great. So I'll show you two examples of diplomas of students, German Jewish students that went to the University of Padua. One of them is a very famous figure in Jewish medical history. His name is Abraham Wallach. We do not have Abraham Wallach's original diploma. He graduated from the University of Padua in 1655. But interestingly, what we do have is we have a copy of his diploma, which was used for an application for a medical position in Germany. When he wanted to get a job in Frankfurt, he needed to produce a copy of his diploma. So this was a certified, verified copy of his diploma. You can actually see on the top over there, it says copia. This is a copy of his diploma. And he's famous for a work which was published posthumously called Die Million Refuot, for those of you who are interested in the field of Jewish medical history. But here I draw your attention to a spectacular diploma of a German student. This is held in the Friedenwald collection in the National Library of Israel. And this student's name was Jacob Mailer, was his Jewish name or Hebrew name, Yaakov Mailer. But his Latinized name was Coppelius Pictor. He was known as Couple in Yiddish, and so Couple became Coppelius, and Mailer means painter, and the Latin translation of painter is Pictor. So his Latinized name became Coppelius Pictor. His diploma, a spectacular diploma, has all the unique features of a specific Jewish diploma from the University of Padua. So, for example, instead of in Christe nomine, it had in Dei Eterne nomine, Amen, in the name of the eternal God. He was also identified as Hebraeus, which was typical of Jewish students at that time, not only at the University of Padua, but in universities across Europe. And also, interestingly, the year of the diploma was often associated with a Christian reference, usually Anno Domini or Anno Nativitate or something like that. So the Jews in their diplomas eliminated those references, and it simply says currente anno, just the current year. Another very interesting feature, which is rarely found in the Jewish diplomas, is a coat of arms. He had a beautiful coat of arms at the end of his diploma as well. And the portrait appears in his diploma, which is also quite rare. You have to pay extra money to get a portrait in your diploma at the University of Padua. And what's interesting is that this picture, this portrait, was also reproduced and ended up somehow in the Jewish Museum in New York. It's the exact same portrait from the diploma. It appears to have been reproduced at roughly the same time in the 1600s. And just to follow up an interesting story, till today, there is, I somehow tracked down a direct descendant of this graduate who was a physician in Germany. His name is Dieter Bingen. Now, this graduate was from the city of Bingen in Germany, and he's fascinated with his own family history. He's done tremendous research, and I helped him acquire or reproduce this portrait of his ancestor, Coppelius Pictor, which he just about a month or two ago presented the mayor of the city of Bingen in Germany. Just to follow the transitions from Padua to Monika's work of Germany. Pictor's son, who went by the name Judah Copilia Pictor, he didn't go to the University of Padua like his father. He now had new options, and he went to the University of Heidelberg. This is what's interesting, is that the University of Heidelberg registry that's printed has the name of Judah Copilius Pictor. Actually, it's right underneath the yellow. I apologize. And it's written in the main archives of the printed edition. But if you look at the actual original archives, you just trust me, you don't need to look at it. His name is not in the original archives. There's a little asterisk where his name is supposed to appear, and it says, please look in the back of the book. And if you look in the back of the book, and David tried to help me with this, I don't know why this happened, but you'll have to trust me here. In the very back of the book is one page for all the Jewish students who registered. So anytime they came across a Jewish student in the registry, they went to the back of the book, they put the Jewish name in the back of the book. And there's a big parentheses around all those names, and it says the word Judaeus across the page. So the Jews had a separate registry at that time, which Monika points out, which was common in some university registries. Sorry about that. There we go. Oh, actually, here it is. Okay, here it is. I don't know how it just magically showed up, but you can actually see on the side it says Judaeus. And this is the parentheses. These were all the Jewish students listed at the very end of the registry. And this student, who was the son of Copilius Pictor, whose name was Judah Copilius Pictor, then went to a Duisburg to complete his training, which was also not uncommon. And here in Duisburg, he is registered with the other students. He's not separated. And here is actually his dissertation, a copy of his dissertation as well. The other item that I identified are poems written in honor of graduates. And of the 100+ poems, I've identified 3 of them from German medical students. And I share those with you today. One of them was from a graduate, Solomon Bingen, also from the same city, Bingen, as Copilius Pictor was, from 1643. This one is housed in the British Library. Another graduate from 1664. This is Hyman Bachrach from Hadamar. Hadamariensis means he comes from the city of Hadamar, 1664. And the graduate whose last name was Levi Buxbaum, his first name is Benjamin Wolf, in 1669. Again, sharing the transition from Padua to Germany of these students in their training. They actually not only went straight from Padua to Germany, they actually went through the Netherlands as well. It was another major place for Jews to train prior to landing in Germany, where the lion's share of German students transferred. So the sons of Levi Buxbaum, for example, of Benjamin Levi Buxbaum, he had 2 sons. They both trained at the University of Leiden. Here are their dissertations. But his grandchildren, by the time his grandchildren were alive, German universities were now open to them to train. So here you have examples of 2 of his grandchildren who are both graduates of the University of Gießen. And supplemental material, and this is what I mentioned. I suspect most of the people even familiar with this history have probably not seen. So Professor Feiner mentioned, of course, a very important prominent figure, Tuvia Harofe. Tuvia was the 1678, the book starts from 1678, because Tuvia and his friend Gabriel were the first Jews to attend a German university. This is a poem written to Duke Friedrich Wilhelm by Tuvia himself. And the poem was requesting from the Duke permission to be able to attend that university. And the poem has the acronym of the Duke himself, as well as Tuvia's as well. So it says Friedrich Wilhelm. You'll have to trust me over here, and his wife's name. It took me a while to figure this out. Others have figured this out before me. His wife's name was Dorothea. Dorothea, and I think I'm not sure if it goes from the bottom or the top. And here is his name in acronym Tuvia Harofe, and then Tuvia backwards, et cetera, HaKohen. So this was the very poem that he wrote to the Duke. And his friend as well, Gabriel Felix, when they finally were accepted, he and probably Tuvia, in accompanying him in this work, wrote for the Duke what's called a grammar tree, which is found. And by the way, both these documents are still found in the German University, is probably where they were deposited some 400 plus years ago. And this is the entirety of the of Hebrew grammar in a chart form to be able to assist. Now, why they were interested in Hebrew is not for our discussion now, but the Germans were very interested in Hebrew. The Hebraists, the Christian Hebraists, were very interested in the language of Hebrew, and that's part of the reason they brought Tuvia and his friend to Germany, was to help teach the students Hebrew so they could understand the texts better. And this is just a dedication of this chart on the bottom. And the final thing I wanted to share with you briefly is a supplement to the amazing work of Monika, and that's the dissertations of some of these German medical students. Now, everybody had to write dissertations. It was common for even in medical school for people to write dissertations, and we have many of the dissertations of Jewish medical students who invariably 90+% of the time wrote on a medical topic like everybody else did. But what I have identified, which I think is quite remarkable and a testimony of the desire of Jews to relate their Judaism to their practice of medicine, are dissertations that specifically relate to Jewish topics. So it's a Jewish medical student in a medical school in Germany who's writing their dissertation on a topic related to Judaism. Obviously not a very large genre of literature. So here you have, this is the dissertation, of course, that Dr. Feiner mentioned by Benjamin Wolf Ginsberger. And this is the original Latin dissertation. This is a dissertation been translated into English, and he, of course, mentioned the correspondence that student had with Rav Yaakov Emden. But here's some other dissertations, and this one was by Solomon Bernhard Wolfsheimer, and this was from Halle in 1742, and it's on the causes of fertility of the Hebrews. Again, a Jewish topic, written by a Jewish student to graduate medical school. This one I think you'll find of particular interest, very esoteric topic. This is a Jewish student. Let's see if I can read Shimon Wolf Worms. I think this might be related to Anshel. Anshel, I think it might be related to Anshel. So Shimon Wolf Worms, and the topic is the reason for the impurity of the human sperm among the Jews. You're looking at me like, what on earth is this talking about? I don't know who his dissertation advisor was, how he or she would have ever been able to understand what he was talking about. But this we'll leave the Hebrew law discussion, Jewish law discussion, for another time. But in his dissertation is Hebrew with the verses from the Torah itself. He's quoting many rabbinic figures in addition to Lowenhoek and Boerhaave and Haller, Albrecht Haller. He quotes Bar-Ilan and other great prominent Jewish figures. And this one is from 1766. This is the first Jew to receive a medical degree in the University of Butzau. And his dissertation advisor was Olaf Gerhard Tixen, who's a very famous figure in Jewish history, an Orientalist. And he wrote, I don't think I have it here, but Tixen, who was not Jewish, he was an Orientalist. He wrote a magnificent Hebrew recommendation for his student at the end of the dissertation. And actually, for those of you who are interested, I realized I brought a copy of the dissertation with me. So I have this original dissertation for those of you who want to take a look at that dissertation after the talk. And just to conclude, this work, which Professor Feiner mentioned also, Masa Tuvia, which we referenced briefly, interestingly, coincidentally, is actually going up for auction. The original first edition, 1707 Venice of Masa Tuvia, which is the work written by Tuvia Harofe, is going up for auction in just a week or two. For those of you who are interested in getting a piece of history and getting the work written by Tuvia Harofe, who's the very first Jew to attend a German university, mentioned in the extraordinary work of Professor Richarz. So thank you for the opportunity to join you for this wonderful event.
Yeah, why don't you do it?
Thank you all for this wonderful opportunity. Joydeep Bagchee is a student, colleague, friend of mine. As my health started failing, he's a German citizen. He moved to the United States and he bought a place near my house to be able to take care of me. So this is very important for me to acknowledge my pride in introducing him. Also, I would like to recognize and welcome the Honorable Consul General of India, Mr. Randhir Jaiswal, who has graced this occasion. Previously, the government of India honored me with a Distinguished Indologist Award earlier this year. Yeah, this year, it's a bit of a blur. And Mr. Jaiswal was there to give me the award. And here he is again, taking a keen interest in young intellectuals making a contribution to Indian studies as well as Indian studies in dialogue with Western cultures and academia. Welcome. Thank you.
No, I have, but.
Good afternoon, friends. Namaste to all of you. Delighted to be here. I came here because our dear friend invited me. As I went through the two lectures, there are so many connections that also goes right into India. There's a slice of Jewish history which is very much part of Indian history, and we take deep pride in that. A lot of people from Israel, from Palestine, Jewish people came to India in the 1st century AD, as early as 1st century AD, and thereafter lived on for centuries. So in one way or the other, or in many ways, Jewish history is as much part of the Indian cultural and social fabric, and we take deep pride in that. Thank you very much for your gracious invitation. Thank you.
I am just honored to be in the presence of intellectuals, academics, and the Consul General who I have met in Princeton and otherwise. My name is Mark Citron. I'm not an intellectual. I'm not an academic. I'm only an attorney. So we'll settle for that. Dr. Bagchee, I am just honored to be here at the Leo Baeck Institute in connection with your translation of Monika's book. and to present you with a token of appreciation from the Hindu-Jewish Coalition. For those who are not familiar with that organization, please. You may not be familiar with what I characterize as HJC, but its mission statement, I think, explains why I'm here and to honor your work. The mission statement goes as follows: building meaningful relationships between Hindu and Jewish communities on shared interests in business, politics, religion, social, and other relevant areas through ongoing communications, meetings, events, and advocacy activities. You and your work exemplifies the mission statement and the goals of HJC by demonstrating the interplay of Hindu and Jewish history, philosophy, culture, religion, values, and intellect. I can think of no better recipient than Dr. Bagchee. Others build walls, you build bridges. I thank you for that. I'll give you accolades, but accolades don't pay the rent. I'd like to present you with a check from the HJC in the amount of $2,500. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
To end this, I just want to say one thing. This is the first book, to my knowledge at least, that an Indian has done of a German work dealing with Jewish history. I am also the first Indian translator of a book by Heidegger, so I don't know anyone who's done that before me, but I certainly hope I won't be the last. So I dedicate this award to many more young Indian scholars, academics, upcoming graduate students. May they all learn German and prosper.
Please like this video and subscribe for more content from the Leo Baeck Institute.